I was standing in a BMW service bay when a master technician quietly told me something that contradicts what most owners are doing, and it might be the reason some turbos fail early. He didn't say it like a secret, more like something he assumed everyone already knew. But the more I looked into it, the clearer it became. Most people don't. Turbo failures don't usually happen overnight. They build slowly, silently, and by the time you notice, the damage is already done. Maybe it starts with a faint whining noise you can't quite place. Maybe your oil level drops a little faster than usual, or you catch a hint of smoke on startup and think, that's probably nothing. But inside the turbo, things are changing. And when it finally lets go, you're not looking at a small repair. You're looking at a bill that can easily climb past a few $1,000s. Now, if you check your owner's manual, BMW's recommendations seem pretty straightforward. Extended oil change intervals, sometimes stretching well beyond what older engines used. On paper, it sounds efficient. Less maintenance, lower cost over time, better for emissions targets. And to be fair, there's logic behind it. But here's the thing, real world. Conditions don't always match what happens in controlled testing environments. According to multiple BMW service documents and independent oil analysis reports, turbo longevity is closely tied to one specific factor most owners never think about. And when technicians start seeing patterns, same engines, same failures, same mileage ranges, they begin connecting dots that don't always make it into official guidelines. The 4 trick isn't a product, and it's not something you install. It's a habit involving something your engine already depends on. Shortening your oil change interval. That's it. Not dramatically, not obsessively, but enough to keep the oil from reaching the point where it starts working against the turbo instead of protecting it. And the extra cost per interval? Roughly the price of a cup of coffee. Now listen, before you dismiss that as too simple, you need to understand what's actually happening inside a turbocharger, because this is where it starts to make sense. A turbocharger operates under extreme conditions. We're talking about a component that can spin at over 100,000 RPM. That's not a typo. And it's doing that while being exposed to intense heat from exhaust gases. The only thing keeping those internal parts from destroying themselves is a thin film of oil. Think of that oil like a protective cushion. When it's fresh, it maintains a stable layer between metal surfaces, kind of like how a thin layer of water can let 2 glass surfaces slide smoothly without scratching. But as oil ages, it starts to break down. Heat, pressure, and contaminants all take their toll. Here's where it gets interesting. Over time, oil doesn't just get dirty, it changes chemically. Its viscosity drops, meaning it gets thinner under heat. Add in fuel dilution from direct injection engines, and now you've got oil that's even less capable of maintaining that protective barrier. And when that happens, those high-speed turbo bearings start experiencing something called boundary lubrication. That's a technical way of saying the oil film isn't thick enough anymore, so metal starts getting dangerously close to metal. Now imagine that happening thousands of times per minute. But wait, there's another layer to this. When you shut off your engine, especially after driving hard or even just normal city driving, the turbo doesn't instantly cool down. In fact, it gets hotter for a short period. This is called heat soak. And here's the problem. When the engine stops, oil flow stops too. But the heat is still there. That leftover heat can cook the oil sitting inside the turbo. This process is known as oil coking. Think of it like leaving sugar in a hot pan. It caramelizes, hardens, and sticks. Inside your turbo, that means carbon deposits forming in places where oil needs to flow freely. Over time, those deposits can restrict lubrication, wear down bearings, and eventually lead to failure. And this is important. Older oil is much more prone to coking. Fresh oil resists this process better. Degraded oil? Not so much. According to independent lab analysis from companies like Blackstone Labs, extended oil intervals can lead to noticeable viscosity breakdown and increased contamination levels. We're talking measurable differences, not theoretical ones. In some cases, oil that's pushed too far shows significantly reduced ability to handle heat and pressure. And if you were to take apart 2 identical engines, same model, similar mileage, but maintained differently, you'd likely see a difference. One turbo might have relatively clean internals. The other, visible, carbon buildup, worn bearings, maybe even scoring on the shaft. This is why some technicians quietly recommend shorter intervals, especially for turbocharged engines. Not because the manufacturer is wrong, but because real-world usage tends to be harsher than ideal test conditions. Now, to be fair, BMW's recommendations do make sense on paper. Thinner oils and longer intervals help improve fuel efficiency and meet emission standards. And during the warranty period, most engines perform just fine under these guidelines. But here's where the gap appears. Lab conditions are controlled. Driving conditions aren't. Stop-and-go traffic, short trips, aggressive acceleration, hot climates, all of these factors increase stress on the oil and the turbo. And that difference between on paper and real life, that's where problems start showing up. So what should you actually do if you want your turbo to last as long as possible? If you're driving a turbocharged BMW and you plan to keep it long term, consider cutting the oil change interval shorter than the maximum recommended. Not drastically, but enough to keep the oil in a healthier operating range. If your car is already higher mileage, say over 100,000 kilometers, it becomes even more relevant. At that point, internal tolerances aren't as tight as they were when new, and the turbo may be more sensitive to oil condition. If you tend to drive aggressively or spend a lot of time in city traffic, that's another reason to lean toward shorter intervals. More heat cycles, more stress on the oil, and here's something simple you can do this week. Check your oil. Not just the level, but the condition. Look at the color, the consistency. If it's darker and thinner than you'd expect, that's a sign it's been through some stress. Also pay attention to subtle changes in your car. Slight increases in turbo lag, a faint burning smell after driving. These aren't guarantees of a problem, but they're signals worth noticing. Now, none of this means every turbo will fail if you follow the factory interval. Plenty don't. But the evidence suggests that adjusting this one habit may reduce the risk over time. And when the cost difference is so small compared to the potential repair, it's worth thinking about. Most people won't change anything after hearing this, but the ones who do usually avoid the expensive lesson later. Take a look at your maintenance habits this week. Compare what you're doing to how you actually drive. And I'm curious, how often are you changing your oil right now? Drop it in the comments. Real-world patterns are always more interesting than what's written in a manual. If this helped clear things up, stick around. There's more of these deep dives coming, and some of them might change how you look at your car entirely.